What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be joined by Brandon Scott from Locked On Wizards to discuss the Wizards just tail spinning over these last 10 games, just 1-9 in their last 10, riding a 6-game losing streak, plus some recent off-putting commentary by franchise guy Bradley Beal on a recent podcast appearance. Is it time to hit the reset button in DC? But first, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best, most qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. And once you have a free job post made on LinkedIn Jobs, which is so easy, all you have to do is add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it incredibly easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Wizards, Brandon Scott, who you can follow on Twitter at Brandon_7 Scott. Now, Brandon, thanks for off to I may say, a decent start for the Wizards this season, and then the wheels have just completely come off the train over these last 10 games. They've lost 6 games straight, just 1-9 in their last 10. So walk me through what has gone on over these last 10 games or so where things have just kind of fallen apart for DC.
Well, I think it's multiple issues with this team right now. Number one, Wes Jr., the kid coach, coming over from Denver. He's supposed to be a defensive-minded coach, and it appears that we don't exactly have the personnel to implement the system defensively. If you look at the team, DeLon Wright is one of our best defensive players, but he's been hurt. And Jordan Goodwin, he's been a beast in the defensive end, but again, two-way player. So, that's a big issue. Is the defense has been a big issue for us. Perimeter defense, paint defense, transition defense, defensive communication. It's just we've struggled mightily from the defensive end, especially from the perimeter. If you look at the last game against the Clippers, that game was lost by the failure to protect the three-point shot. So, defense has been an issue in DC. And another issue I would say would be depth. We had going into the season, we had a lot of depth. Now we are dealing with a lot of injuries, especially if you look at the point guard position. DeLon Wright, while he was kind of an under the radar acquisition, showed the importance that he has in his team. Defense went down from there because he showed a lot of prowess in the defensive end. And Monte Morris come over from Denver. He hasn't exactly, been that point guard we're looking for, distributing, driving the lane, being, defending other guards. So injuries again, they cost us too. So those would be, in my opinion, the two biggest reasons why we kind of crashed down to earth.
So kind of, focusing on a couple of those, it sounds like some personnel issues, as well as, the injuries and stuff. But at what point do you maybe start to take a look at Wes Unseld a little bit? Like how much do you kind of put on his shoulders for where this team is currently at? Or has he kind of not really gotten a fair shake, at least as far as this season is concerned in your eyes?
Well, I think there's two big issues I'm going to point out. One, Wes Unseld coming in, he's a first-time head coach, second year. So, you come into an organization where veterans he's still trying to implement a system. When you're a defensive-minded coach and when half the roster can't play defense, it's hard to implement a defensive system. You know what I mean? And two, from an organizational standpoint, the Wizards are between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, you have a fan base that's asking for a rebuild. You look at contracts. Bradley Beal to sign a supermax with a no trade clause. So where do you get to the point where he's going to want out? If you look at Kyle Kuzma and Kristaps Porzingis, both of them are going to the offseason with player options. And if you look at Rui Hachimura, he's going to be a restricted free agent. So there's a lot of decisions that need to be made with this team, and they need to really form an identity if they want to rebuild or go forward. Because if they want to go forward and try to contend with Bradley Beal, with that supermax, is going to get hard. It's going to get hard to try to surround him with talent. And while getting Kristaps Porzingis from Dallas was a good trade from Tommy Shepard, it's just proven. If you look at our trade, if you look at our picks, we don't have a lot of picks left. And if you look at our young core of Corey Kispert, Rui Hachimura, Denny Abdihai, and even Johnny Davis, outside of Rui Hachimura, which one of these young guys are teams really calling about? So it's a hard position because on the other hand, the owner is famous for saying that he's not going to tank. But you get to a point where the assets are drying up. It's going to be hard. It's going to be long, but rebuild has to happen in DC.
It very much feels like the Wizards may be kind of stuck in where you don't want to be as an NBA team, right? Is kind of NBA no man's land, that kind of middle ground where you're not quite tanking, but you're not quite at the top, cream of the crop, if you will. And at the core of that, you mentioned, Bradley Beal, right? A guy that the Wizards committed a lot of money to this past offseason, the 5-year, $251 million extension, the Supermax contract. He was recently on the No Chill podcast with Gilbert Arenas and said this quote. He said, on the business side of it, there were no teams in the market, just free agency wise. I'm just being frank. There was nowhere else for me to go where I can go win, right? There were teams that strategically wasn't what I wanted. Realistically, I won't say my hand was forced, but this was the best option that was on the table. Now, Brandon, if you're Bradley Beal, why go out and say something like this about your current team, the team that you're currently on and playing for?
That's a good question. It's just wasn't the most tact thing to say, but I think a lot of us knew that going into the Supermax that Bradley Beal just wasn't that guy. Now, if you look at his playing past, when he played second fiddle in the backcourt with John Wall, he played well. Being a spot up shooter, he formed, being a scorer. Now, if you look at him trying to be the guy in DC, trying to be, a distributor, and it's just not his game. And it's just you got to ask yourself in DC, how many years are we going to try to make Bradley Beal the guy? It's not working out. So the comments, I'm not surprised. But if you look at the no trade clause, a lot of places like LA, it makes sense. So I guess I don't see him. It's a good question because I don't know if I see him past the deadline. Those comments kind of wake up, some ideas. And if you look at from the owner's standpoint, that's not what you want to hear from your star guy. You just don't want to hear that, all the girls were taken and then you just happen to choose me to go to the prom, So, I think if you look at that and if you look at Kuz, because there's been a lot of reports that he's been shopped around because in the offseason, he's looking at $20 to $25 million. And from the Wizards standpoint, if you're going to pay him, you're not necessarily going to pay Rui. But if you're going to get rid of Kuz, then, that's why I say there's a lot of decisions need to be made from the Wizards front office because, you got 2-3 guys are going into the offseason, with expiring contracts. So there's a lot of decisions that need to be made, but it woke up a lot of fans. A lot of fans are not happy. Those comments really, especially with John Wall coming back last night, it showed that John Wall still has a lot of love in DC. So if you combine that with Kyle Kuzma and him being shopped around and KP not knowing if he's going to take the player option or not, you could see, maybe a rebuild starting to cook up. So, again, there's a lot of hard decisions need to be made by this team.
A lot of uncertainty, it feels like, kind of moving forward for DC. But, I was really kind of intrigued by what you said there. I mean, is there a trade? Is there an option like on the table this season that you would, kind of feel good about as far as a deal for Bradley Beal? I know the trade clause thing kind of makes things a little bit sticky. So you've got to send him to a situation that, that he is also kind of committed to or interested in. But is there a team out there that you feel like the Wizards could deal him to and get back a decent return and kind of set themselves up with that first domino kind of falling down towards maybe a rebuild?
That's a tough one because in my humble opinion, we waited too long to trade him. If you look at the previous offseason when Golden State had the 2 picks and they were shopping Wiseman and Wiggins, I thought that was a perfect pick for us or a perfect trade. I think we waited too long. If you add the trade kicker, the no trade clause, and the contract itself, it's going to be hard to move. Are they impossible to move? Not impossible because, the John Wall contract and even the Russell Westbrook contract were considered untradeable at one point, and we were able to move those contracts, but it's tough. No trade clause. I could see LA, but I don't see a lot of teams really in a hurry to try to help the Lakers win a championship. Boston, because of his relationship with Jason Tatum, I could see maybe a return of Jaylen Brown and maybe a pick, but it's hard at this point because that salary is a big commitment from any team that wants his services. So impossible, no, but it's going to be hard. So and again, no trade clause. He dictates where he goes. So I could see LA, I could see Boston, maybe Miami, but the chances are slim right now.
What would need to be, would it be Bradley Beal the most likely potential first domino to fall, or would it be something else along the lines of, you mentioned, potentially Kyle Kuzma there, kind of having some, teams with some reported interest in him. I think Suns and Hawks, names have been kind of popping around. What would signal that this organization is taking the steps that, it feels like you kind of want them to take in signaling a rebuild?
I would say trading Kuzma would be the first domino to fall. Because if you trade Kuz, you're losing one of the members of the big three. So you would have to, put a rebuild in motion. KP, I think a lot of fans are to the point where, trading him, try to get as much value out of him. But on the flip side, he's been healthy this year. He has produced. And, with him being still a younger player, maybe a foundational piece to kind of build around going into a rebuild. But, you got to try to get as much value as you can because, like I said, this team doesn't have a lot of picks left. And this young core, while they have proven to be good role players, none of them are going to pan out to be all-stars or even, starters. Denny's the closest one with his defense, but his three-point shot just hasn't responded the way the Wizards want to. So I think eventually with Bradley Beal, the bright lights of LA are going to come calling, and he's going to force a trade because you get to a point where, he said that there was no other options, but he wants to win. And Washington is just not going to happen because we need a rebuild. It's just we don't have a lot left. So
uncertainty on the horizon in DC. What does the future hold for Bradley Beal? How much longer will he be a member of the Washington Wizards? Of course, you have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Wizards. Brandon, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Yes, sir.